Okay, so we're holding in Hilchos Taaruvot, Siman Kuf Sif Dalet. Actually, tonight we'll go into Sif Dalet and Sif Hey, even though the musagim, the concepts that are in Dalet and Hey, extend up until Sif Hey. So we'll do some of them today, some of them next week. To do too much at once is tafasta meruba lo tafasta, and we won't be able to absorb everything anyway. So we'll go into the Mechaber and the Ramah and some of the Noise קיהן, the commentaries. But before we get into Sif Dalet and Sif Hey, the Siman as a whole, Siman Kuf Hey, is Isur Shenofal Letoch Heter. And last time we were wondering why the Mechaber just calls the Siman Isur Shenofal Letoch Heter if he starts off with Kavush. And we said, well, Kavush is a form of Isur falling into Heter. The thing is that Isur falling into Heter can happen in various ways. There's various forms of contact, Isur and Heter, including two items, one Heter, one Isur, laying next to each other. We learned the din of Tato Gavar, which is also one on top of the other, and the various heat, various degrees of heat that can affect the Heter. We also talked about the difference between liquids and solids. Solid is able to retain its heat somewhat more than liquid. So these are details concerning the mixtures, the various mixtures that can occur that would have different results depending on the degree of heat. What we're going to see now is that you can have a very high form of the highest form of all, called roasting. And still, it's not going to be as powerful as cooking. There's something about cooking, something about liquid that transmits flavor much more extensively than just plain heat. So even though it's true, Kli Rishon is very, very strong. The Rishon Shehusar Mala'esh, Kli that is Rishon, meaning the one that was on the fire, even though it's removed from the fire, it gets to be very, very hot, at least for a while. All that is true, but that's on the assumption that we have liquids. And even if we don't have liquids, we did learn that the din of Tato Gavar is a special din that the bottom one has more strength than the top one. So even though one is hot and the other one is cold, the fact that the one is in the bottom is very, very hot, it means that it will somehow penetrate the one that's sitting on top of it. But all of this, remember, is only if it's very, very hot. Once you introduce klisheni, once you introduce irui, it somehow reduces the intensity of that heat. No, it has to be rishon. In the din of Tato Gavar, it's only assuming the heat of a Kli Rishon.
And how is that?
Yatzaledesbo is just an indication of a Kli Rishon. In other words, an indication that if the Kli Rishon is at least a Yatzaledesbo, it has the din of Rishon.
So Yatzaledesbo would already be a Rishon.
As opposed to Klisheni that is Yatzaledesbo. Because even though it's Yatzaledesbo, right? Remember that a concept of Yatzaledesbo? 113 degrees or whatever.
The Taaruvot does not any
situation. Right. Once you take the position that Klisheni is not Mevashel, then it does not have that koach. Even if it's Yatzolet, the whole chidush by Klisheni is that even if it's Yatzolet, that's the chidush. The Chasam Sofer we mentioned briefly would extend this into Klishlishi situation too. It's Yatzolet, but we hold, like the majority of the poskim, that beyond Klisheni, we're not machmir at all.
Beyond
Klisheni.
By Klisheni, you are still machmir?
You may be machmir. In other words, so the Mechaber says, at least by Yisur, not in Hilchos Shabbos, that by Yisurim yesh li zoher. Why? Because, we have Rishonim that say that there's at least a klipa. It would not be sufficient behadocho. It's a klisheni. By Yisurim, there would be machmir. Some are machmir, but we don't. B'di'eved, we all hold, including the Mechaber, that you don't have to be concerned. But yesh li zoher, he uses the word li zoher, right? Lechatchila. So Kli Rishon is really where the problems occur for the most part. But it can happen in different ways. Okay?
With Yatzoledesbo is Nizar Lahatchila. If the temperature is lower by Kli,
it's for sure not a problem.
How about Kli Rishon less than Yatzoledesbo, still called the Kli Rishon?
No, it's not called the Kli Rishon.
So the Yatzoledesbo is the minimum temperature.
Unless it's a davar gush. right? With the davar gush,
Can't see it longer, so
that
it's
you
still
put it
very
into a kli sheni,
Yeah, but the davar gush itself
it
is
retains it.
rishon.
Right, in a sense, it's like a kli rishon, more like a kli rishon.
So the rishon is only called kli rishon when yatzolidus.
Yes,
When it drops below yatzol rishon, it's also already.
right. And that is why we say even if something is under fire, but it has not boiled yet, and you put something in, usually took it out, it's not yatzolidus, but
And there is again yatzolidus.
it's not boiling even.
You say yatzol, you're boiling the time.
No, I'm saying something is under fire and has not begun to
It has not reached the temperature of yatzolidus, but
right.
the minimum.
It has started cooking a little bit, but it has not reached any problematic level of heat.
Temperature.
Yeah, temperature.
So
Right.
the minimum problematic heat temperature, if it's still below that.
That's correct. Yeah. The question is, how long was it in the pot? Our scenario was that something fell in temporarily. You put in a spoon. Oh, it's the wrong spoon, but it hasn't really begun to heat up. It was briefly. We did say that if something was already very hot, even if you put it in for a second and you took it out, it's still usher.
Who's hot now? The spoon inserted?
No. The tafshil.
Tafshil.
The tafshil, right? We said that even though that was only momentarily, we don't differentiate between a half a second or a second or a minute. You put it in, that's it. And that's because it is surrounded with roitiv. When was the davar tzolul at least. By davar tzolul, I don't know if how much I went into that. There's a difference between a davar tzolul, a liquid, and a davar yavish. When things touch each other momentarily, but they were both dry and no roitiv, you can make an argument. The Chachamim talk about it that nothing happened. In other words, in an instant,
There was no
second,
exchange of taste.
there's no exchange of taste in such a quick, movement. But if it's solul, if it's in the liquid, then it could be that in 1 second it has already absorbed. It was completely enveloped with the liquid, the iser, whatever it is, in the top shell. So we don't say, well, it was just in there for a second. It's too late if it's hot. Only if it's not hot, then you can say, well, it's not hot yet. So then that's. And by the way, what I did not mention when we did a little bit of chazara last time about dover gush, we spoke. Is rice considered dover gush? What if you have mixed vegetables? We're used to dover gush being a solid piece of, and I think that's what the Shach says. It's brought down that when we talk about solids, we mean solids. We wouldn't mean mixed vegetables, even though
something that is attached to itself.
as far as the detail of the dover gush retains its heat, that would not apply to couscous, right? Or any mixed vegetables where even though they're dry, it's yavish. That does not make it a dover gush necessarily. For something to retain its heat, it would have to be solid, hot potato, hot piece of meat versus beans and peas and rice and
That
lentils.
makes sense because they have a lot of surface.
Yes,
So there's a lot of area where they give off heat instantaneously.
That's right. Yeah. All right. So now we're holding. So we discussed those various concepts, and now we're onto another concept, and that is tzli. Tzli is a form of heat. Could be very, very hot, and as the Meforshim explain, including the Ramah later on, that when we talk about roasting, we're talking about either it's in an oven, as he says later on, kol mevushel belo roitev, any cooking that is without liquid, or baked. Kitzli would be like roasting, on the barbecue. That's what tzli means. But there's different kinds of tzli. Kedar, there's different terms or different scenarios of tzli. But the common denominator between them is that there's no liquid involved. It's not cooking. So you can have roasted chicken. How do you make the roasted chicken? It could be in the oven, in a pot. It's in the oven, but there's no liquid.
But that it gives off as much.
That is why on the night of Pesach and the Seder, our custom is not to have any roasted meat. Okay, now, what does that mean? What is roasted? Real roast. Right, so it's because of that, because we could not make the mistake that we're eating the Korban Pesach outside, right, of Yerushalayim, so we don't have it on the Seder night. So what is roasted? Real roasted means barbecued. That's what tzli really means. But baked in the oven without liquid, a piece of meat or even a piece of chicken that has no liquid is a form of roasting. It just comes out a little bit different. Broiling it, for example, has the heat on top, whereas baking has the heat from the bottom. And in convection ovens, you have it all around. Right? Either way, if there's no liquid involved, that constitutes sli.
No.
Yes. Actually, that's a good point. What does it mean? No, you said no outside liquid. The Aruch HaShulchan explains that the reason why we're machmir in some situations on a shpud itself, on the spit, is because if two things are on the same spit, there is some internal liquid. You know, when animals of prey, tigers and lions, devour their prey, the meat that they eat contains some liquid, and that is why they don't have to drink that much water. If you ever wonder, why aren't they drinking? Birds, occasionally you see going into ponds, pigeons going into puddles, and getting their little bit of liquid that they need. But these animals of prey, they get a lot of their liquids from the meat that they catch. There's liquids, and that is for the most part sufficient for what their daily need, or the regular needs. They still need maybe some water, but that satisfies them. So the meat does have a little bit of liquid, but that little bit of liquid, as we will soon see, is not the same as the liquid of bish. That is what we're going to be seeing now. But the Aruch HaShulchan does point that out, that if you were to put two things, heter and isser, on a spit, on a shpud, the din would be different than what we're going to be learning here, as far having them next to each other on the oven. In other words, or the stove without liquids. Frying is, if you use a frying pan, you can use a frying pan without liquid, especially if we said it has Teflon. So you are able to cook up or bake something or whatever you want to call it without liquid. It is possible, you can make almost anything like that, depending what's involved. You may have a hard time scraping off whatever is stuck there to the bottom, but it is possible. So there is an afkamina, of course, when Isser and Heter is involved. That's what Sif Dalad and Hey, Vav and Zion speak about. So before we get into it, let's...
One other question.
Yeah.
When we talk about sleep,
Uh-huh.
is it any heat, though, because in an oven, there's generally, and it's on the metal.
Right.
As opposed to on a spit, or on a barbecue where it's
No, it's the same.
Same thing.
Same thing. For the most part, sli means any form of heat without liquid involved. So before we learn Sif Dalad and Hey, not all of you have the Mechaber, so I'm going to just review a Gemara, Maseches Chulin Daf Tzadik Vav Amid Beis, which is where the Mekor for some of these halachas is. In the Gemara, we learned that if you barbecued a yerech, a thigh, a leg of an animal, the hind legs. Why the hind legs? Because that's what the gid hanashi is, right? You're not allowed to eat the gid hanasha, the sciatic nerve. Yeah, you need to if you want to have. The Ashkenazim today don't eat the hind quarters because the custom.
They prepare it, right?
You would have to remove it if you wanted to have filet mignon.
Before you cook it.
Sure, of course, before you cook it, definitely. That's the problem. The Gemara says it's an example of what happens if you didn't remove it and you cooked it, you barbecued. That's exactly what we're going to talk about. So anyway, Ashkenazim don't eat it today. Don't bother with it. Sfardim still do sometimes if they have somebody who's knowledgeable knowing how to remove the entire gid. You don't have to worry about that in chickens, only in animals. So anyway, the Gemara discusses an example of a yerech, a hind leg, right? Thigh, actually, that was roasted or barbecued together with the gid. Now there's a separate machlokes of yesh begidin benois and tam or not, which we discussed in the past. We're machmer anyway with the gid, but the question is if there's tam. So that's a separate. The end in the maskana is there's no tam in gid. In the sinews there's no tam. But anyway, based on what the Mishnah says, there is. The way the Mishnah reads, it's a problem in the Gemara there. So if somebody by mistake, the halacha, whatever, roasted the whole leg, the thigh, with the gid, what's the din? So over there, Shmuel brings down, no problem. Go ahead and eat the meat until you get to the gid. Go ahead, piece by piece by piece by piece.
But he holds it's not night and time,
What?
Probably he says it right.
No, it hasn't. No, that's not the problem here. That's the chiddush here. That's not the problem here of nois and tam or not. There's no bishul here.
Because of water.
There's no water.
But it's one. What is it? It's one.
Makes no difference. He says that's the chiddush here. When you're roasting it, it's not bishul, right? So you don't have the tam being spread all over the meat. So just go ahead and eat until you get to the gid. Tosfos explains that he didn't really mean all the way to the gid. you would have to remove or hold or leave a kedei netila, which is another concept that we'll learn today. We learned about klipas, not impure klipas, like the klipas are in the Kabbalah, which is also klipa, shells, impure shells. And it's not the klipa of an orange or an onion. Klipa is a thin layer, a very thin layer that is sometimes necessary to remove in various scenarios of Isser and Heter. That the whole thing does not become Asur, but it becomes Asur Kedei Klipa. Yeah. A thin layer, a shell. And sometimes, if it's not a klipa, of course, the whole thing would be Asur, unless you had Shishim Kenegdoi, that required 60 times. But so klipa is not necessarily the thinnest layer. There's something less than a klipa. What's that? Hadocha be'alma. Rinse it. For example, let's say you find out that there's a big sale in Ralph's on salmon. Okay, great. The halacha is, by the way, that you have to see the scales. Even though the guy swears to you, this is salmon, can't you see the color? And there are no scales on it. It's filet, you cannot buy it. We don't rely on the testimony of the goy to tell you that this is a kosher fish, even though it looks like it. So what? There's so many non-kosher fish that may resemble salmon. So in order for you to buy the salmon, the fish, the kosher fish, by goy, you have to see the scales. Okay, let's say you see this. But the same knife that he used to chop off the head, the tail of the salmon, he's also using to chop off the squid, shark, or whatever, lobsters, crabs, right? All the catfish, I don't know, whatever he has there. So, right, because it's not hot, but it's still a duchka de sakina, it's sharp, the knife is sharp. So what's required is one or two things. You have a choice. Either you cut small piece on the edges where the knife hit, you cut it off, small little slice, right? Or you rinse it out well. That will be sufficient. In the olden days in Europe, or even in the Middle East, I'm sure, when people used to go to the fish market, they used to bring their knife and ask the guy to use their knife to prepare the fish. But today, you want to buy a dafka there because it's a big sale. You see the scales, of course. Even though he's using his knife, you don't have to worry about it.
No, something that you do. You have to
obviously, you have just to rinse it. So anyway, so there's that is a very small concern where hadocha might be sufficient. Just remove the edges. Like you said, there's no heat involved, right? You have cold chicken and cold cheese touching each other. They're cold. You rinse it off. It's not a problem. Nothing happened. The problem begins when you have heat, right? You can have a scenario, by the way, potential problem scenario, where it's cold, but because it's a liquid, they got mixed together, right? Some cheese fell into some liquid. That's fleshig, meat. But it's liquid. You can't completely remove it. It's liquid. I mean, the cheese you may be able to wash off, but what about the liquid? Maybe there's something got into it. It's hard to get it all out. And we did talk about, theoretically, basar b'chalav. If you can remove the chalav from the basar, right, would it make the basar mutter? If you get all of it out, because part of the reason why it's asr is because we don't think that, or it is possible that all of it came out, right? So, and especially when you say chanan, once something has become asr, it's asr. You don't say, well, maybe eventually the Isser can come out. Well, maybe some of it did, not all of it came out. But if there was a way, remember the case of smetana on the top? If you have a layer on top that you can remove, maybe you wouldn't have that problem. So anyway, for the most part, heat is what causes all these problems of Isser and Heter being mixed up, because we're dealing with Tam now, and sometimes you're not only dealing with the Tam, you're dealing with the Isser Be'in too. And if the Isser is Be'in and you can see it, then obviously that's not a problem, because you just remove it. But sometimes the Isser is not Be'in. And if the Isser is not Be'in, then you need a Shiur of Bitul. Or, if it's something which is like a din of a birya, then of course you're always going to have a problem, even if you don't see it. It's a birya. Okay, so here we're talking about a different form of mixture, or a different form of contact involving heat, called sli. So the Gemara tells us something very interesting. Shmuel says you don't have to worry about it. The gid was there. Go ahead and eat. It's not bishul. The time didn't spread. Just remove it in the netila, like Taisa says. What's a netila? The Chaver explains netila is roichav etzba. It's the width of the thumb. Now, even though etzba, when you see etzba, it usually means the second finger. This is called a goidel. Each finger has a name, right? But here, for our purposes, the roichav etzba is the width of a thumb, which is approximately half an inch, I think, 0.4 of an inch. I forget exactly, but you can look at it and take off that much. You have to. So that's the case of the first case in the Gemara. But Gemara asks the question. Rav Huna says, "Wait a minute, I don't understand." There was another scenario. There was another case of a gdi, of a goat that was nitzla bechelboy, that was roasted with its fat. In that case, the way the Chachamim resolved it is that you could not eat any of it, and the whole thing was asur ad oznoi, until the ear. In other words, every part of it, even though the ear is so far removed, everything is asur. You couldn't just eat this and not that. So what's the difference? Moses says, yes, you're right. That's the halacha in case of a gid shetzolo bechelboy, in its own fat, the chelev, the forbidden fats. That's because of fat. Shani chelev, the Gemara says, chelev is different. Chelev is shomenhu, is fatty. And because it's fatty, the whole thing, the whole tam, the whole chelev spreads everywhere. Greasy, fatty. It's going to affect the whole meat. You know the difference between chelev and shuman, right? Here we're talking about forbidden fats. The chelev also needs to be removed before you salt a piece of meat. You have to remove the gidanosha, of course, if that's something that you're going to be eating, the hindquarters. You have to remove the blood, some blood vessels that are still there, and you have to remove the chelev before you salt. You salt this piece of meat with the chelev, you're in trouble. We'll see that in Hilchos Melicha. Big problems. Chelev, the forbidden fats that are on certain parts of an animal. There is chelev. And there's shuman. Shuman you have in your piece of meat that it's okay. The only chelev that is mutter is the chelev of a chaya, of a wild animal. Deer. Right? You want to have deer meat? The chelev is okay. No problem. There's no isur of chelev on a chaya. The isur of chelev is only on a behema. Goat, cows. One of the, by the way, tasty parts of the fat of a sheep is the tail, the alyo. Very tasty. In Israel, in some restaurants, they serve it as a delicacy. It's called in Arabic li'ah, or alyo, in Rosh HaKodesh. So here we're talking about the Gemara's cases, but wait a minute, how could Shmuel allow you to eat the whole thing? I have another situation where it was roasted, the chelboy, it was the whole thing become asur. Shani chelev. Chelev is different because it spreads. So because you have something that is fatty, it's not just because it's chelev. Chelev happens to be something fat. Sometimes, not all, by the way, not all the time. And because of that, because it's fatty, it spreads. But he didn't remove it. He just roasted the whole thing. Imagine you're on your own in the mountains somewhere. I don't know. When you want to eat dinner, you want to eat meat, you know how to shech, you have your tools with you or whatever, and you catch a mountain goat. Some of them are endangered, so you have to be careful not to take them. But anyway, just because you know how to chef doesn't mean you can just go ahead and eat it and put up a fire. You have the gidanosha to be concerned with, and you have chelev. But wait a minute, you're going to tell me, what about the dam? The dam you don't have to worry about if you're going to be roasted. Dam, blood, is only a problem when you cook it. If people were not to cook the meat that they want to eat, they can actually eat it raw, in a sense. Raw meat, it wouldn't be as a problem as cooked meat with the blood. It has blood. It's the cooking, the moving the blood around in the piece of meat that causes problems. Dama porish, right? But if you don't have salt in the mountains, in the desert, you're stuck, you want to eat. Obviously, if you die, you can eat almost. But here you just want to eat meat, and you know how to chef, and you have a chalaf, a sakin, that is very, very sharp, no nicks, no nothing. Great. I mean, you can't shoot the animal, you have to chef it. So, great. But you still have to worry about the chelev and the gid hanosha. And if you don't know how to move the gid hanosha or the chelev, then some coyotes or vultures are going to eat your meal. You won't be able to have it. So you still have to know how to remove those things before you put it on the spit and you start barbecuing it and attract the bears while you're doing it. But anyway, if you want to do it, you can do it, but that's what you would have to do. So you would not have a problem with blood, you would have a problem with chelev. The good news is, if it's a deer, you don't have to worry about the chelev either. So catch a deer. don't catch. Harder to catch, but goat and sheep would be a little bit more of a difficulty.
Domesticate the chai.
Still, they have deer farms in New York.
Still stays a chai.
It's still a chai, sure. Chayas were not offered as korbanos, as a sacrifice. So the halachas are slightly different. Why weren't they offered as korbanos? Because the Torah didn't want to make you go fetch something that is difficult to kill. Bring something that is easily accessible for sheep and goats and cows. Yeah, these animals are in the wild. Go find them. Set up a trap and, and hope to catch one. Okay, so the din of the Mechaber reads like this. Based on this introduction of the Gemara, that chelev is what can cause problems because chelev is mefapea, it spreads, even without water, right? So even though you're having tzli, and the chiddush by tzli, which is different than bishul, is that it will not necessarily take the little bit of time that maybe they're all over the meat. But chelev, if there's chelev in the meat, the chelev will travel. Chelev is fatty, usually, many times, and that would make it probably, that would make it usher. So the Mechaber says, Bamed Dvarim Amurim, that's how you begin Sif Daled, that we said all the dinim in the past, that the heat presents a problem when you have Isser and Heter. Kishenofal etochatavshil, when it falls into a stew, where liquid is present, because the liquid takes the plita of the Isser and mixes it in the entire tavshil. Aval Isser ben cham ben kar. Listen to this. If you have an Isser, whether the Isser is hot or cold, shenofal ala tzli, sheitz la'esh, that fell on top of something that was roasting close to the fire, eitz la'esh, close to the fire, near the fire, eno oise ela kedei netila. The entire Isser here would only affect the size of a netila. In other words, you don't have to deal with shishim here. You don't have to deal with the whole thing. The whole thing is us. You know, you need to remove a netila. Netila is more than a klipa, so it is more substantial. It's hot after all, but because there's no liquid involved, you don't have to be concerned about shishim. You don't have to be concerned about the whole thing becoming aser. It only will affect kedei. So that's the chiddush so far in Sif Dalet. What's an etila? Shu ke'oy v'rochav etzba, it is the width of an etzba. Lefichach, he brings the example, yerech shetzola begidoy, a thigh that was roasted with its gid, not with chelev, remember, with its gid, or chatichas isar, nevela, pork chops, whatever. Shetzola chatichas heter, that somehow they were next to each other, they were being roasted together, close to each other. They touching each other. You would have to remove a kedei netila around where the gid is, or from the chatichas heter that happened to be roasting next to the chatichas isur, mokum shenago, the place where it touched the chatichas isur. People go to the park sometimes; they want to have a barbecue. Right? Can they use the park's barbecue? No, because there's a lot of tarfas there. There's fats. I mean, it's still dirty. You're not going to be able to do it unless you kosher that. So you would have to kosher it. Once you kosher it, it's okay. Even though there's no water, right? But it's strafe.
But isn't the old one?
What is that?
Whatever food rests, aren't they? Okay, if there are food rests, then you have
usually I don't think people clean it up. Goyim don't care about that. You know, this guy put hamburgers, this guy put something else. It's all trash.
Well, if there are food rests on that, obviously.
No, it's not clean. It's dirty. It has all the fat on top of it.
And the fat isn't cold by.
And what about the blias in the metal, right? And it could even be a ben yoimah too. If you came in the afternoon, the guy was there in the morning. So anyway, you can't use it unless you kosher that. I mean, it is possible to kosher metal through libun. You bring your torch. Just don't burn the park down. You know, be careful. Yeah, and you can really clean it up very well. But people don't want to bother with that. Nobody comes to, unless you're just better off bringing your own barbecues in the parks and cleaning it up. But so even though there's no water involved here, you still have blias, you still have an iser, or at least a kedei netila, that will affect your meat that you're putting directly. However, let's say you come to a hotel. Okay? You ordered in your hotel room a kitchenette. What is a kitchenette? You have your little stove. Can you use the stove, not the oven? You brought your pots and pans. You want to make challah for Shabbos. You want to make scrambled eggs. You have your own kelim. It makes no difference. What's that? What's the halacha? Yes. As long as the burners are clean, you have metal touching metal. You don't have food touching the metal. Following? You have metal touching metal, which we'll learn about later on, what the din is metal touching metal. It's not so much of a problem. You still would have to make sure that the burners are clean. And now, of course, you should let the burners on for a while to kasher them too. Because usually the burners clean themselves up, and usually people don't put food on the burners, so you don't have to really worry about it.
By gas, like the fire would just might have been bubbling out of the pot.
That's correct.
But by electricity, the problem, that would be food that bubbled out of the pot, either they
Right.
or just rose.
They get it very hot. They usually, but I would. That's what I would recommend. Usually people don't cook directly on top of the burner, just in case they did. It's pogrom anyway. Clean it up just like you do for Pesach. Clean it well, the burner, or you put it into the oven for a while, and then you just turn on the fire for 15 minutes or whatever, just to let the heat envelop the entire area or where the food usually sits on top. But for the most part, most of the time, people put pots or pans on top of the burner, not the food directly. But I make tortillas, and when I make corn tortillas, I put it directly on the burner. It's kidneys anyway. It's not chametz. Okay. But that's one of the only food items that I put directly in the burner. Otherwise, it's metal touching metal, and if it's clean, turn it on, maximum turning it on for a few minutes, you're okay.
I would recommend anybody to ever use the pot.
Right.
Well, why don't we say A is there?
But lechatchila, you don't use tarfas that's pogrom. Kalim that are pogrom, you don't lechatchila use it.
Could take a piece of it.
No.
No, theoretically.
No. Lechatchila, you don't do it. You don't do it lechatchila, no. Yeah. These halachas here are b'di'evet. Yeah, could somebody, you're not allowed to even eat pizza and steak on the same table, lechatchila, unless you make some separation. Two Jews, one wants to have pizza, the other one wants to have meat. They're on the same table, there's some distance, there's some halachas that they have to follow in order for them not to mix up any of their food. Right, a hecker. So kol shekain, putting Isser next to heter, cooking it lechatchila is a problem, spilling over, and so forth. It's actually brought down in the Shulchan Aruch, such a scenario, that, they're next to each other. But if it happened to be somehow, or you needed to, or whatever, you have to be careful, right? That they don't touch. And if they did, well, depending what touched, the pots touched, or the meat actually touched, there might be a halacha of klipa or natila to be...
Was there moisture between the pots?
Well, the pot, yeah, but the pots don't have any moisture usually on the outside. Inside. Yeah.
Let's see,
Right.
Milk,
Right. Yeah. We will see later on in Kuf Ches. We will talk about steam in reicha. The smell is that a problem sometimes? The smell of the non-kosher food that is completely covering up, filling in the oven. The smell. Yeah. So anyways, we'll cover later on, towards the end. Okay, so that's the chidush here of tzli so far, and the chidush of kidei natila, which is bigger than a klipa, of course. Goes on, now this one you will be familiar with from Basar b'chalav. An iser fell on a chaticha that is in a pot. So you have a pot full of goulash, okay, and or some other food, and you have a chatichas iser falling on top of one of those pieces. It happens to be that one of those pieces is not inside the liquid; it's outside, it's sticking out. Remember that from Basar b'chalav?
Sure.
Chaticha that is mechutz laroitev. So iser fell al chaticha shebegder she chutz laroitev. The Mechaber says. Now, v'lo nir agder, we're talking about that he did not mix it after the iser fell in. Otherwise, you're back to square one. You're talking about bishul, you're talking about tam, right? So we're talking about it just fell on top of a piece of meat. It's hot, but it's not in the liquid, and he didn't mix it. Lochisa, neither did he cover it. What does covering have to do with it? Anybody remember? Everybody remember from Basar b'chalav? What happens if I cover a pot? I didn't mix it. I just covered it. Why should the cover make a difference?
You can first rise.
Okay.
And then they cool off, and they back into the food.
Yeah.
It causes air.
Yeah, it causes everything to, in a sense, it causes everything.
Yeah, like a
Similar to mixing. Now, in Shabbos also you have to be careful with the pot. Let's say you didn't cover your pot before Shabbos.
You didn't.
You didn't. You just had a pot. Oh, I forgot to cover it. You can't cover it on Shabbos unless it's fully cooked. Because once you cover, you put a lid on, it increases the heat. You're contributing towards the bishul on Shabbos. You can't do that. If it was covered and you remove it, you can't put it back either, unless it's fully cooked. So you got to be careful not to remove Friday night, the cover, because many times Friday night it may not be fully cooked yet, unless you started cooking early in the afternoon. Right? Same thing with mixing, of course. You're not going to mix potatoes that may still not be completely cooked. You can mix them now. You're going to cook them. So that's a problem in Shabbos. So that's why the Mechaber brings down here the case similar to Basar v'cholav, that you did not mix them, you did not put it on the lid. So that piece of meat is just heat. There's no liquid. It's only going to answer. You can take up a kedei netila of where it touched, and you're okay. Of course, the isur is out. But if it's in the liquid, l'rashi kula, u'leri afilu miktsasa. Depends. There's a machlokes rishonim. If there's halfway in the liquid, or partially, was partially or entirely, according to some even partially. Or afilu kula chutz l'roitev, even the whole thing is out of the roitev, but veneer or kisar ter, you didn't mix it, or you did cover the pot. A roitev mefapea. Here's the concept of piapua. The roitev will cause to travel, to spread. The tam, and then of course it spreads and gets everywhere. So here you have the concept of piapua that we talked about a couple of days ago, that sometimes a taste can travel from point A to point B, and sometimes not, even though they're both hot. It all depends on the physics here. If there's chaylev tends to be something fatty, tends to travel by itself. Liquid causes tam to travel because of the way it works. Takes things with it. Water, as you know, goes everywhere. But heat by itself is not sufficient to take a tam that's usher from point A to point B. Except for kedei netila. Kedei netila it does. In other words, that much, the Chachamim figured there's enough moisture. Okay? There's enough moisture to aser kedei netila. In other words, if there was no moisture at all, it wouldn't be even aser kedei netila. So there's sufficient moisture to aser kedei netila when all you have is heat and no liquid. Now comes an interesting part. When did we just say when did we say that sli, roasting, is only going to be a problem of kedei netila? B'yerachim gidoy, a thigh with its gidanosha, and similar food, dover kochush, lean meat, as they call it in English. Lean, not fatty. It does not have the power, the strength, to spread throughout the whole chaticha. Aval gdish shomen, remember the Gemara that I just mentioned? A gdish shomen, a goat that is fatty, shetzolo bechelvoy, that you roasted it together with its chelev. If you don't have 6 in the entire gedi against the chelev, sheboy also lechol afilu miroish oznoi. Pretty much the language of the Gemara. You cannot even eat from the top of the ear. Nothing. If there's no 60, shekiven shu shomen, since it's fatty, it will spread. The chelev will spread everywhere. Avalimu kochush, if it's lean meat, even though you don't have 60 kedei kol chelev sheboy against all the chelev, if it happens to be meat that's lean, why? You would have chelev here. If it happens to be chelev of an animal that is considered an animal that is whose meat is lean, the chelev itself is also not fatty. Since the animal meat is not fatty, take a look at fish. In order to understand this, let's take an example from fish. You know that certain fish are more fatty than others? Sea bass. Did you ever have sea bass? Very fatty. Salmon also has a little bit of fat. But try cod. Cod is dry. Have you ever had cod? Huh? Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, certain fish are more fatty than others. Have you ever had duck? Duck is very fatty. Huh? Yeah. Compared to chicken? Now look at turkey. Not turkey, Greece, the country, American turkeys. Turkey is drier than chicken. Not only that, even within a chicken, certain parts of the chicken are more fatty than others. the thigh and the breast have noticeable difference, right, between them. The thigh is what?
Thinner. Thighs is thinner.
No. There's more moisture on the thigh. Most people don't want to have the breast. You go to the butcher and ask for chicken legs. Why chicken legs? Why not the breast? The breast is dry. If you're ever in a yeshiva kitchen, over there it's called top and bottom. You want to have the top, or you want to have a bottom. The bottom are the legs, the top is the breast. And you see a lot of people want the bottom. And that's what they serve you at a banquet. They serve you the bottom, they serve you the leg. Why? It tastes you. It has a little bit more schmaltz, more fatty, more juicy than the... So that's what he says over here. Yes, exactly, sure. Right, exactly. You have to know how to prepare it. And because of that, some meats are better barbecued than cooked. You have to know how to prepare it because of that. And they say with deer meat that it's better when it's fresh, or the other way around, when it's not fresh. There's some wild animals are better after they've sat for a while, they've been frozen for a while, and some are better when they eat right away. There's so many little difference between the various meats. Is that with pheasant? Yeah, it could be. Just make sure that it's you salted it on time. You don't wait unless you soak it in water. Meat that you don't soak in water, left it for 3 days without soaking it.
How about freezing it?
Freezing helps, of course. You bring it from South America, to Israel. They have to freeze it. Otherwise they're going to have a problem unless they already salted it. Yeah. Today, many of the Schlachthaus, the slaughterhouses, they already do a lot of the things I think they take care of over there.
They are salted here.
It depends.
We were getting
From Uruguay, yeah. I don't recall. Every place was different. I don't know what they did there. I'm not sure. All I can tell you is, by the way, with liver, you have to be careful. Today, many times, in many places, they don't sell the liver broiled anymore. As you know, liver you don't salt. Liver you have to boil. It's all blood. So you can just buy broiled liver. You can eat it however you want. Today, when you buy it, it's fresh. You just can't cook it. You can't eat it the way it is. You have to broil it. And to boil it properly, you have to have it done in such a way where the blood will drip. You cannot sit in its blood. Same thing with chicken. When you're salting the chicken, right, you have to have it in a place where the blood will drain. It will not sit. You don't want to have chicken sitting in its own blood. It's going to be a problem. You have to have it in a place where it drains. So to properly broil a liver, you have to have the tools for it. I mean, either a barbecue somehow, and make sure that it's properly broiled on all sides, and then it's okay. So the Mechaber made a distinction here between Basar Kochush and Basar Shaman, lean meat and fatty meat, because if we're dealing with lean meat, then you don't have the problem of piapua, of chelev traveling, because even though it's chelev, the chelev will only be like the meat. If the meat is kochush, the chelev is kochush. Kochush meaning lean. If you're an expert, you somehow know that this meat is meat kochush, then you don't have a problem. We're talking about sli here, remember? We're not talking about bishul. So we're talking about sli, so you're having the chelev either travel throughout the meat because it's all fat, or it's only kochush, and if it's only kochush, eno mefapeya. Now here's a chiddush. Listen to this one very, very careful, because on this one we're going to talk about quite a bit next week. Here he adds a chiddush, and this is quoting from the Tur. The Taz has a whole diyun here, a whole discussion about this Tur. He has a hard time with this. Okay? Even though the isur is kochush, lean. The chatichas heter shenitzlas imoy, but the chatichas of the heter meat that happens to be roasted together, that is the one that's shmeina. The heter, the kosher meat, is the fatty one. So the isur meat is lean. The kosher meat is fatty. Nevertheless, because there's fat involved here, ha'isur mefapea bekulo, the isur will get all over the place because of the fat in the heter. Wow. That's a big kiddush. It's telling me that the isur is not fat. The heter is the one that's fat. So what? The fat is there. Somewhere there's fat.
The isur.
Which is a kiddush. We're going to have to really, really explain how that works.
You should be going from the fat.
Right. That's the kiddush here. The heter has the fat, and apparently what the Mechaber is saying, what the Tur says, is that so what? since the heter has fat, the fat somehow gets into the isser and makes the isser fatty.
Right.
Oh, then it comes back. Wow, it's a big chiddush. Why is that a big chiddush? Because of a famous cloud that we'll learn, we need to understand it well, that a nesar, something which is nesar, that has become usr, cannot make something else usr beyond the point where the isser can travel.
We had that with blood.
Yeah. Okay, remember that rule?
This is mutar.
Yeah. Here, if the isser cannot make the heter on its own usr too much more than a kedei netila, the nesar, in other words, the shuma now, the chelev, or whatever, actually the fat in the heter will be able to make that isser stronger.
It's interesting that you're asking that because a little different. Here it's not shuman is esar and now it's the meat.
Right.
But rather the shuman is that the original isser is to affect.
Right. Obviously. That's what we would have. We would have to say something along those lines because apparently the Mechaber knows that rule.
Yeah.
So obviously there's something about that difference, that this is a facilitator, if anything. And that's a good way of saying it. Somehow it is facilitating, but it's still close in concept to that rule. Why should that make it? Especially when we will see a halacha later on about the difference between an isur machmas atzmoy and an isur balua that we briefly talked about, an isur being usher by itself versus something that is usher not because of itself, but because it has absorbed something. It is not as strong as an isser in itself. A piece of nevela is completely isser machmas atzmoy. An isser bolua means you have a kosher piece of meat that had absorbed once upon a time tarfus, a tam. It's usher, it's chanan, whatever you want to call it. That chanan, or that piece of meat that has an isser bolua, is not as effective. In other words, the isser balua cannot travel as far. It's balua, unless it's of course, cooked, right? But it cannot go too far. You have heat, two things touching each other, but it's an isser balua. The piece of meat that is treif is touching a piece of kosher meat. But wait a minute, this treif meat is not really treif. It has absorbed something that's treif. So that absorbed taste will not just travel if it's not cooked together. So we will see that there's a difference. There's an obvious difference between something that is balua versus something that is not balua, because it's not as strong when we're dealing with plain heat. So that's going to complicate this a little bit here, because here the chelev, in a sense, is similar. Okay, the chelev from the heter going into the isser, coming back into the heter. In other words, what's the difference? So there's a whole discussion about this, but we don't have the time right now. I just wanted to bring it up that this is, of course, presents a somewhat of a dilemma. Why is it so that the heter is the one that's fat? It's being roasted close in proximity, touching the isser. There's no liquid involved, but so what? It is fat. The fat, we say, travels. But the fat is in the heter. The fat somehow will go into the isser and then affect the heter. They're close. There's fat. So what if the fat's coming from the head? Somehow, like Elon said, the fat here facilitates, regardless of where it's coming from. Now he adds one more detail. Anything that does have a pipua, that fell, in other words, that it travels because of the fat, that fell into a specific spot that I can identify. This is where it touched. Even though there is 60 to mevatel the isur, because it's fatty, still, if you know where it touched, and you have the shishim, tzorch netilas mokom, you still need to remove a netila. This is not like the Rambam, by the way. The Rambam says, no, once you have shishim, the whole thing is mutter. The Aruch HaShulchan explains, why do you have to remove a netila just because it touched over there? You have shishim anywhere. Remember, whenever you have shishim, the whole thing is mutter. What's shishim doing? Shishim is getting rid of the tam. So why would Mechaber say you need a netila here? So the Aruch HaShulchan explains that it is as though it's be'in. On that part, if you can identify the spot of where it touched, it is as though on that spot the isur is be'in. So you have to remove it. Remember, this is heat. With bishul, the tam spreads equally everywhere. You have shishim, great. It's gone. It's dissipated. But with tzli, with roasting, with fire, heat, no liquid, if you can identify the spot of where it touched, you still, even if you have shishim, And you need shisha because it's piapua, it's fatty, but you know where it touched. That spot requires a kedei netila. The Ramah says, guess what? You know what you just learned in the Mechaber about kochush and shaman, making a difference whether you need him or just kedei netila? Don't worry about it because today we're not such experts in knowing what's a shaman and what's a kochush. Just everything is also anyway. So, right? So let's see the Ramah. Kol mevushel belo roi teva ofu yidinu ketzli b'chol davar. So that we said before, anything that is cooked without liquid, even though it's cooked in the pot over the fire, but it's like it's, or baked, it's still going to be roasting. It's going to be like roasted. Ve'yesh oimim, de'enanu bikim. We're not bikim, we're not expert what's called as a medium of kochush or shaman. Ve'yesh lesu b'chol inyan ad ikashishim. You have to always make usher unless you have 60. We don't know what's kochush and what's shaman. They roasted, they touched, there was heat. It's very hot. They touched. You need shishim. Now this is different than the Ramah that we saw before. Ramah spoke about a situation where you have heter and iser touching, but there one of them was cold at least. And even though that we did say that they both were hot, it's also completely kuloi. That's because they were both hot, and it was from a kli rishon, right? As he says, "Im shneim chomim yichoim kli rishon akol asur, im nichom zeh etzel zeh." It would all depend, of course, if it's basar b'chalav or not, how much would become asur, or if a klipa would be sufficient or not, if one of them was cold. But anyway, here he says, since we're not experts in differentiating between kochush and shaman, yesh lesu b'chol inyan ad ikashishim. V'afilu ikashishim tzarich netilas mokum, as we said, you always need a netilas mokum. But all of this I'm telling you only wherever some doubts exist as far as the level of fattiness. But if you're dealing in a situation where there's no fat at all involved, cheese with, I don't know, things that are not fatty, for sure kochush, then the only is the isur of kedei netila would apply here and not shishim. So the Ramah says we're not experts. Everything will be also shishim unless you know for sure that this is a situation where there's no fat involved at all. Something, I don't know, isurim that have no fat whatsoever. The Shach, however, on this Ramah says that he doesn't really understand why the Ramah says that if it's vadai kochush you don't need it, because in Melicha, in Hilchas Melicha, we see that he says we don't distinguish at all. There's always going to be an isur, as he says. And altogether, the situation where blood is a problem. Still, if it's kochush, we'll always use shish. This is the more so, if that's the case by melicha, the more so by tzli, which is worse, hotter than melicha, right? That you should require therefore shishim. So therefore, he holds that the Ramah's din of kedei netila by kochush vada is only b'isur derabanan. But otherwise, in Yisur Deraisa, when you know for sure, they touched, there was heat involved, everything was hot, we would be machmir to require shishim, according to the Ramah. Everything would become aser. They touched, that's it. We wouldn't just remove a netila. But if you have shishim, it helps. Right? If you have shishim, somehow it touched, then of course you don't have to worry about the heter, but you would still have to take off a netila wherever it touched. Okay, I think this is where we'll stop for now. The next time we will discuss this point a little bit more, this chiddush in the Mechaber, of how is the Nes are able to so much damage, that it was traveled so far, because there's various halachas that tie into it. So Mr. Hashem will cover that one a little bit